as far as scripting goes, we tend to be pretty set on some of the formats that we use across all campaigns. Obviously, typically we work with software and IT companies. So we find that their target audience and ICP usually likes to hear similar things. Now, to break this down, I've obviously redacted some of it regarding company names and certain things like pain points, but this should give you a general idea of how we like to organize our scripting. So the way that we do introductions 90% of the time is obviously using some form of a pattern interrupt. Now, the way that we go about doing this is slightly different to how a lot of companies and individuals tend to use that. So we start off by the very general stuff, so saying what company we're calling from, the name, and then we ask them if the name rings a bell. Now, the reason we go about it this way is we like to create a sense of familiarity at the start of the call to buy us slightly more time when it comes to that opener. Now, 9 times out of 10, they will say, obviously, the name doesn't ring a bell, but there is a chance, for example, if we've sent through emails or potentially LinkedIn requests, that we skip a lot of that rapport building, an initial explanation as to what it is that we do if they do recognize that name. But assuming they don't, our next port of call is then saying something along the lines of, no problem, sent you over a couple of emails in the last few weeks regarding X pain point. Now, this is obviously very dependent on what it is that you do. But the idea is we kind of want to, in a very simple terms, capture what it is that you solve in terms of a pain point. Now, from this point, we pause very briefly. So, a natural conversation pause, nothing that's too long, nothing that's too short. And we transition into our permission-based opener. So this is our pattern interrupt. It's something along the lines of, I appreciate I'm catching you out of the blue. Can I take 30 seconds to explain why I'm calling? And you can tell me if it's relevant or not. Sound fair? So this is just designed, as you'll know, to get that initial permission from the prospect, give ourselves the platform to be able to pitch to them, and also give them that value proposition without them committing to too much time. So from there, we 9 times out of 10 will get through that as well. So it's a case of us then transitioning into number one, who we are, how we can help, and then who we typically work with. So we tend to get invited in by obviously the role that you're targeting, that are doing well, but if they're honest, they could do with, and then it's obviously the pain point that you fix. So a lot of misconceptions when it comes to a cold call and why people oftentimes get unqualified quite soon on is they assume that they're not the right customer because, the pain point they've got, they don't see as being massive. So we like to give them the initial thing of basically saying that we appreciate they're probably doing well, like they're growing progressively. But if they're honest, if they were to look internally, they struggle with this pain point. We then list the pain points. So it's either pain point 1, or others have pain point 2, and these are oftentimes very different. They're almost on a pendulum and at opposite scales, opposite ends of the scale. And the reason that we do that is we want them to associate themselves with being a buyer, being a client of what it is that we offer. And the way that we do that is if they select one of these extremes, it will also enlarge the problem that they appear to have, right? One of the things that we use is we use a line in here that's designed to get a jerk response of them saying, not everything's perfect. I'm sure you've heard before. So it's a case of saying, I get the feeling, John, you don't relate to or recognize any of those issues. We then pause. So this is the point in which the lead will either unqualify themselves. So they'll come back basically saying, wrong number or the wrong person, or I don't own the business anymore, or something along those lines if there's something wrong with the data. But in most circumstances, this is then the opportunity for them to either throw out an objection for us to handle. So something along the lines of, no, we do X, Y, and Z in-house. We're really happy with how that's going, etc. We then handle that objection. Or in other cases, people will almost chuckle and appreciate the sarcasm and then come back to us saying, I wouldn't say it's all perfect. I do recognize those issues, etc. Now, once they've acknowledged that they recognize that, it's then a case of us pinpointing which of those pain points they see being more relevant, right? So which one of those would you say resonates more? Once they've picked this, we call it picking their poison. So it's obviously where we zoom in massively from that point. We understand the pain point of the business at this stage, so we can start to zoom in slightly more. So we use various different frameworks internally when we're training SDRs in terms of what to say and how to build up pain when it comes to a lead that you're calling cold. An example of this is, say they pick one of the pain points and they're quite blunt about it. They don't really go into much detail. It's our job then to dig deeper. So when you say problem, pain point 1, for instance, what does that look like for you? Can you paint the picture slightly more? So we're looking to get them to give us, a bit more of the story. Why are they struggling with that problem? What have they potentially done in the past? What are they doing currently? Why is it they're currently, struggling with that area of the business? Then it's a case of us trying to understand what they've done previously to fix that. So they may have worked with companies like ours before. They may have tried nothing. It's just trying to pinpoint the tried fixes there. And as a result of that, we then want to hit them with, the question of how long have you been struggling with X or Y problem? So this then, we should come out of this, if this goes well, we come out of this with more detail as to the problem they're facing. We're understanding what they've tried to do in the past and what clearly hasn't worked, if it's still a pain point of theirs. So we can tailor the pitch to fit perhaps what they have/haven't done in the past. And then also understanding how long it's been the case that they've been struggling with this problem. That's really important because obviously we really want to zoom in on the pain. And oftentimes when we cold call people, they don't quite realize how much pain they're going through in some of these areas. So we've got to highlight that for them. Then it's a case of understanding what they're currently doing if they've not already told us. Again, a lot of this is common sense in the sense that some people are very talkative. They tell us what they're currently doing. They tell us what they've done in the past. Others will only tell us about the pain point, and therefore we need to dig a bit deeper. We try and get an idea of how that's going so far. Oftentimes it's going okay, but there's probably room for improvement, which is then our job to dig a bit deeper to get an understanding of where they see potential improvements or what is going well. And then it's a case of zooming in slightly more on the specific issues. This is very different business to business, but that specific issue and trying to pinpoint even further what about that pain point they're struggling with. Then a very important part of our scripts is we like to basically repeat the prospect. So we will basically repeat exactly back what it is that they've told us. So that makes sense. So from what I can tell, and then we're basically saying the exact same thing back to them, but rewording it slightly to show that we've understood their problems and understood perhaps what they've tried to fix in the past. But then equally just show the simple fact that we're listening. And on a lot of cold calls, people don't really listen to the prospect, and that leads to people hating cold calls and everything like that. So we find that's very important to show that we're engaged with the prospect. Then we move into a very simple elevator pitch. In fact, simple enough for a 5-year-old to understand. So we make it very brief, very concise, and then also very simple in terms of the words that we use and the problems that we solve. Which means that, when these people are having a busy day and we've cold called them out the blue, it makes it very easy for even high-level executives to understand, in a snap, what it is that we solve for them and why we could be useful. And then it's a case of then zooming back in on some of the pain points when it comes to our pitch. So the whole idea of these scripts is they're almost designed to provoke any possible objections. And that might sound quite counterproductive, but from our experience, we find that like 95% of leads are people that have some sort of objection in mind when it comes to booking a meeting. So we'd rather handle them at this early stage, potentially disqualify leads, handle these objections. So by the time that your sales team is obviously speaking to this lead, they've had some of those initial objections crossed out, essentially. So the way that we ask for the meeting is very casual. It means it's very easy for the SDR, but then also very casual for the prospect, right? Very easy to say yes. So assuming we could solve pain point, which they've just been speaking about for the last 3 to 4 minutes, this line is very key. Is there any reason you wouldn't invest 20 to 30 minutes to discuss this in more detail? So the idea of this is, the idea of investment is that, that time isn't going to be wasted if we find that we can solve that issue. But, for the majority of people, that time would be worth it if that was the end result. Now, assuming we get any response here that isn't a no, we then follow up very soon after saying, have you got your diary to hand? So an example of that would be, You deliver this line and someone says, maybe. Us then saying, have you got your diary to hand, is a very good way of forcing their hand in a very soft way to get them to think about booking a meeting. When we speak about a diary, it's obviously about setting aside some time to speak in further detail. We obviously highlight to the SDR that they must check the calendar for availability, all the basic stuff. Now, when we book a lead, we like to deliver what we call a bit of a rehash. So the way that works is we'll deliver something along the lines of, so on that call, name of the prospect, my account executive, John, will be asking some questions to better understand where you're currently at. So we're setting the frame for what that call is and what they should be expecting. This has really helped us in terms of increasing show rates because there's no sort of corridor of uncertainty with the prospect and then also the account executive or someone in the sales team. That sort of line of communication is delivered to them on the first point of contact, which is very important. We then transition into really easing the barrier to entry, or shall I say exit in this case. So you seem like a straight up person. If by the end you don't see us being able to help you with X problem, you don't mind telling John no, right? And likewise, if John doesn't see it being a fit, you're comfortable with him telling you no. So this is just designed to be almost like a verbal, informal contract. And the reason that we deliver this is, again, it makes it very easy when they come into that initial call to be very honest. So your sales team isn't wasting time on prospects that aren't actually interested. But equally, it gives off the impression that you turn down a lot of business and therefore they have, slightly more curiosity in terms of showing up to that call. Then what we like to do is we like to deliver a bit of a joke towards the end. So final thing from me, you're not going to put the phone down thinking, oh God, I've just booked in with a shady cold caller, are you? We have this in and a lot of the time people laugh, but it makes it seem like we're a lot more familiar. They're probably going to remember the cold call slightly more than the last one they got. So it's just having that bit of humor and building some rapport. And then finally, is there anything you need to disclose ahead of the call? Is there anything that I should have asked ahead of you meeting with John? And that's designed to just pick up any last gems of information that obviously help the sales team. With some of our clients, we also have some slightly more complex rehashes. So we'll go in a bit more detail about what the call would be. We can also ask more qualification questions at this point. So obviously they're booked into the calendar. Worst case, they hang up. We can obviously call them back to qualify them further. But we find that actually after booking the call is a very good opportunity to ask some more discovery questions. So that changes client to client. But this is just a very basic framework for how we handle those initial cold calls.